There we go.
I'm going to start with a line from one of my favorite stand-up comedians. He said, "I was born at an early age." So you can figure out who that person is. No longer in very good standing around the country. Anyway, started my life in Council Bluffs, Iowa, October of 1942. At that point, I was the oldest of two. I have a younger sister who is 3 years younger than me. My father worked for the Union Pacific Railroad in Council Bluffs, so we lived there. I went to about third or second grade, probably first and second grade in Council Bluffs. Probably when I was maybe between 5 and 6, my parents got divorced. We moved to my birth mother, her name was Phyllis, and my stepmother name is Theresia. My birth mother and my adopted mother, stepmother, were cousins. And I guess what I have heard from my mother before she passed away, that my dad was looking for someone to take care of his 2 children. And I guess she drew the short straw. So they were married, and we have a stepmother, and she has a daughter, and she's 3 years older than I am. So both my sisters have birthdays in November. They're 24th and 25th, they're 23rd and 24th. I don't know, I never can keep track of them, but they both have their birthdays one day apart in November. So my older sister should be 85 later this month, and my younger sister will be 79. So we moved to Missouri Valley, Iowa when I started 3rd grade. That's where I went through my schooling, graduated from high school in 1960. Going back and look at our church history, on my grandmother's side, her maiden name was Mitten, and there was I think his name was Frank Mitten, who was under appointment for the church in the early days. As I've seen some pictures of, had a long gray beard, and his assignment was western Iowa and eastern Nebraska. So if you look at the early churches in western Iowa, from Shenandoah to Council Bluffs to Missouri Valley to Logan, Woodbine, Magnolia, Mondamon, on up the west coast of Iowa and Nebraska, Omaha, and Fremont. So I don't know, I think that was his territory. I'm not saying he started all of those, but that's, our LDS was along the western border of Iowa. After I graduated, I went to Graceland in fall of 1960, thinking when I went to Graceland I was going to be some kind of a business person. I think during the freshman orientation week I ran into L.D. Weldon, and he said, "Well, I think you should be a physical education major." I said, "Okay," not knowing what that entailed. And I ran track when I was in high school. And so when I came to Graceland, I started on the track team. I sat out my freshman year because I had shin splints very bad. All I could run on was the grass and the football field. I didn't know anything about cross-country because we never had it when I was in high school. So I saw cross-country meet when I was here at Graceland and decided that that might be something I would like to do, so I did. I graduated in May of 1964 with a degree in education. When I was doing my student teaching, some of you might remember what major event happened in November of 1963. I was doing my student teaching in Leon when President Kennedy was assassinated. So I think we had probably a few days off. I'm not really sure on that. I'm going to kind of go back a little bit. When I was at Graceland, I had a work study in the student center, and I think then you could do a 14-hour or 21-hour week work assignment. I think I was 14 hours, and I don't know, was it $1.25, maybe an hour?
90 when I was there.
Maybe
75, I believe.
75 cents an hour when I was working. So my job in the student center was to hand out games, and they actually played games back in the 60s. And we set up the main floor for church services, and then had to take down the chairs. It was interesting that if you wanted to, people lived in the dorms, if you wanted to be to the front of the line for the meals, and the first year or two was all in the basement of Walker. So people sat in the front rows so they could be, and they dismissed them by rows so you could get to the front of the line and eat. One of the unique things about Graceland early was that in the basement of Walker had long tables. The tradition was whenever a young lady came to sit at the table, all the guys had to stand up. So if you were at this end, you might be talking with somebody and not see somebody coming at the other end. So it kind of interrupted your meal. But anyway, that was a tradition that when they moved to the current dining hall, that didn't move over there. I can tell you a little bit about my summer jobs. Between my freshman and sophomore years, a friend of mine, his name Paul Baker from Denison, his dad found us a construction job in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. At that point, they were in the process of building an atomic power plant. And our job, I found out when we got there, it was all manual labor. We were working on putting in a water line around the facility. And that meant, here's a shovel, start your digging there. And we did that for the summer. I remember we stayed at an YMCA in Sioux Falls. I remember after the first couple days, my hands were kind of like this, and the only way I could get out of bed was to roll out of bed because my back was so sore. I'm not used to doing manual labor. Okay. Anyway, I don't think that was a very profitable summer job as far as money-wise. I know my parents weren't very happy with what I came home with, and you know, I should have looked up to see what the cost of Graceland was back at that time, but it wasn't what it is now. When I started college, my folks said, well, we'll help you with 2 years. Okay. After my second year, I was thinking about transferring to, then it was Kirksville, because it was very inexpensive. On the track team was also Bill Fonts, was one of the track members, along with Ralph Strait. Bill said, evidently said something about probably not coming back next year. He said, well, why don't you come live with us? So the Fontses lived 2 houses to the the west. So during that year, I stayed with them. I think maybe they charged me like $40 a month rent. If any of you know Bill Fonce, he could be a good used car salesman. So he had a summer job with the Forest Service in Idaho, and during that time that I was with there, he said, he came back and he said, well, I made really good money out in Idaho working for the Forest Service. He said, you should do that. So the next summer, he got us, myself and Bill and Kenny Johnston went out there to work. Bill was lead. He made lots of, several $1,000s because the part of the work crew, they had them fight forest fires. So when summer that Bill was working, it was a good fire season, so they got in extra hours. When I was out there the first time, I think we had one fire adventure that we went on. So that wasn't that profitable for us.
Yeah.
So 2 more summers I worked in Idaho at the Forest Service.
Right now, so that we're seeing the people that are talking. They're picking up our whole screen.
Move it to
Anyway.
gallery.
I know, but that's
Our job at that point with the Forest Service, and we worked it was in northern Idaho, a little bird called Pierce. First place they discovered gold in Idaho. Forest Service in that area had work camps out in different regions, and they had there were lots of white pine trees that were growing in that area. White pines suffered from blister rust, and there was a couple of weeds that were intermediate hosts for the blister rust.
No.
So the job for the summer workers was to go through areas that they had designated and
Well, I put it on.
pull out the
I put it
weeds.
on. We have it so that they have that option.
Okay.
But they can choose to go back to gallery mode if they wish.
Yeah. Tell them to shut off the microphone, Rick. Anyway, so that was my summer. I worked the summer, 3 summers in Idaho for the Forest Service. When I graduated from Graceland, I left in the fall of, or summer of 1964. When I left, I did not have any kind of a permanent job. So partway through the summer, remember what was going on in the early 60s, I got a letter from my county draft board said I was supposed to report for a physical, pre-induction physical on such and such a date. So I wrote them back a letter, so I'm working for the federal government. I can't make it for my physical. Okay. I got two letters that summer. One from my draft board. Another one later in the summer came from the superintendent in Russell, Iowa, offering me a position teaching middle school, it was junior high then, and coaching girls basketball and other athletics. One of the selling points I think that he tried to make coming to Russell was they were the largest town in Iowa that did not have a tavern. So I suppose he was thinking that since I came from Graceland, I would be maybe a non-alcoholic drinker, I don't know, but anyway. So I started my teaching career in Russell. My first salary was $5,000 a year. And I think after the second year, it went all the way up to $5,100. Big raise. I knew almost nothing about coaching girls basketball. In fact, I came back to Lamoni. I talked with one of the girls basketball coach here to get some tips on what I should be doing. So after the second year at Russell, then I moved to Fremont, Iowa, which is halfway between Ottumwa and Oskaloosa. When I was in Russell, I went to church in Sheraton. When I was in Fremont, sometimes I went to Ottumwa, sometimes I went to Oskaloosa. In Fremont, I was doing the same thing, middle school, coach girls basketball. Our girls basketball team was a little more successful. I knew a little bit more about what I was supposed to be doing. Partway through my second year at Fremont, I started on my master's degree in school counseling because I decided I didn't want to be continuing grading papers and that sort of thing. Worked on that through, I was about halfway through my master's at Iowa. After my second year, or into my second year at Fremont, I decided that I was ready to move on. At that point in the mid-60s, Mediapolis, Iowa was a powerhouse in girls basketball, 6-player. So there was a position that was open there. I thought, okay, I applied for the position and it was accepted. But I think the process with the draft boards at that point was because I had a deferment because I was teaching. I did not sign my contract in March of '68, but I had a contract, but it would not take effect until the school year in August of '68. So in June of '68, I got another letter from my draft board that said you will report for a pre-induction physical on June, what's your birthday? 5th. June 5th of 1968. So when I do this presentation for some high school students, I have a snow globe that I bring that, and when I tell them about, what happens to a snow globe when you turn it upside down. Everything falls down, and when you turn it back up. So my life was turned upside down in March of '68. So I ended up I passed my pre-induction physical. Went to Fort Lewis, Washington for basic training, went to Fort Leonard Wood for combat engineer training, and I went from Fort Leonard Wood to sunny South Vietnam on an all-expense paid tour for 14 months. Now, back up a little bit. Phyllis and I connected. She probably need to correct this too. I think we were both physical education majors. She's a year behind me, so I think during my senior year, maybe we started dating. But I graduated and went off, so that kind of went apart. Before I went to Vietnam in October, I came to Graceland Homecoming, and I think we reconnected at that point. Phyllis was, I'm not sure if she can tell you where she was. I was in Vietnam till January of '68. I came back. I got tired of people asking me, well, what are you going to do now? So I went back to Iowa. The second semester working on my master's degree was, I guess, a full-time graduate student at that point. That would have been in mid-January through May of '70. We ended up getting married in August of '70. I'll let Phyllis tell you about that. After I hadn't graduated yet, I had one more summer to do. It was an internship. After we were married, Phyllis was employed with the University of Kentucky, so we lived in Lexington. I wanted to come back to Iowa and coach and teach, be a school counselor. So we did. I got a job in Dunlap, Iowa, as a high school counselor and girls basketball coach. Dunlap, the year before, they had a really good girls basketball team. I think they went to state. But during the interview, they failed to tell me that all, 5 of those young ladies had graduated, and they only had one starter that came back and was playing, and she wasn't that good. She was okay, but so anyway. So I was only a girls basketball coach 1 year, because I think we maybe only won 1 game. So we were in Dunlap for 3 years, and then we moved to North Bend, Nebraska, which is about 18 miles west of Fremont on Highway 30. So we went to church in Fremont. So all of the places that we've lived, we've gone to then RLDS congregations in Lexington, Kentucky, and Dunlap. There was a congregation in Dunlap, Logan, Magnolia, Woodbine, all around Missouri Valley. When we went to North Bend, we went to Fremont. Okay. We moved back to Iowa, and when we were in North Bend, I was a high school counselor and started the boys cross-country program over there, helped the track. We were also one of the first schools in Nebraska to have girls cross-country. And at that point, the girls could only run JV because they didn't have separate girls division. The girls had to run with the JV boys. And they had the girls track coach eventually took over the program, and they had a very good program. So we moved back to Iowa in August of 1986. My job was at Southwestern Community College working in student services. The title was a special needs coordinator, which was to work with students who had any kind of physical disabilities or needed accommodations in the classroom, extra time for taking tests, or needed handicap parking, or whatever. So that was my main job. I also worked in student services. I did school visits out into the area high schools, a lot of places in southwest Iowa. Eventually, I moved over into the assessment center. We did a lot of testing for voc rehab clients who were possibly coming into taking classes. So in 2002, I took early retirement from the college. One of the nice things about their early retirement was they let us stay on their health insurance until 1 month before you turned 65. So that was one of their good selling points. So I was off for the summer, which was unusual because I never had summers off when I was teaching. In the fall of 2002, there was a position open at Graceland in the CAP Center for students who had been dismissed for academic reasons, and then they brought them back. So my job was to be I likened it to a truant officer. To make sure that these students, and they paid extra money to be part of the program, that they were going to class, doing their assignments, and that sort of thing. That was not something that I really enjoyed. So at the end of that academic year, I decided that I could do something else.
But you also got to coach.
Yes, I was also the interim women's track coach during that. That was interesting experience also. We had some good teams, good athletes on the ladies track team. So after I left Graceland, then I did some other part-time jobs. I worked loading grain trains there in Creston, which it wasn't hard. I wasn't doing it by hand, but it was, so they'd say, well, we're going to load a train Tuesday. They might call you Monday night, so we moved it back to Thursday. So you clear your schedule for Tuesday, because it took almost 24 hours. So you clear your schedule, and then, okay, I got Tuesday open, I got something else. So anyway, I did that for a while. And then there was a friend of mine who was a scout leader with me. I worked at the county courthouse in maintenance, and there was a position that was open there part-time, 20 hours a week. And I named it, I was in charge of environmental services, which means I emptied waste baskets and did the sweeping and that sort of thing, clean windows. But it sounded better to say I'm environmental services rather than I'm a janitor. Anyway, so I ended that. I think I did that for like 12 and a half years. During that time, I also started in 2005 as assistant cross-country coach at the Creston High School. So I did that for 15 years. I retired from that position in the fall of 2020 at the end of the cross-country season at the state meet. We had really good teams the years that I was fortunate to be there, and they were all graduating, so I thought it was time for me to let somebody else have all the fun. So anyway, that's kind of my life story so far.
Let me have it just a minute, yes.
Tell me a little bit about what's kept you in the church. How come you've stayed active?
My mother was a RLDS church member. My grandmother was. We went to church in Missouri Valley. I was baptized in, the old church in Council Bluffs. And if I remember, I think my father and I were both baptized at the same time. Some of you might remember Dr. Rooch. Not my favorite teacher, but anyway, her father did the confirming. So I was confirmed by, I don't remember what his name is, but anyway. So I grew up in the RLDS church, and so that's when we moved. Phyllis will tell you the same thing. When we moved, that was what we were looking for.
Church home.
The RLDS connections.
I got two questions. How long were you pastor in Creston, and how long were you involved in Boy Scouts in Creston?
I was pastor longer than I needed to be. Anyway, I don't know.
I'll take a guess.
15 years.
It's more than that, but I can't remember the exact date, Gary.
During the last 3 or 4 years, I had the inclination, and our numbers are going down, that I would be the person in charge of closing the building. Okay. Not something that I look forward to. Second part of your question, I was an actual scoutmaster in Creston for about 8 years, but I stayed involved with Boy Scouts for probably another 6 or 7 years after that, going on campouts and a variety of things. So that was one of my projects, I guess.
Okay, we'll turn it to Phyllis. I think we could probably fill another half hour with you, but we will turn to your wife.
You got the abridged version.
Appreciate all.
Well,
Appreciate all
after
your
you
help.
saw
We
my
come back tonight.
long
Yep,
list of
back
things,
Great.
we've been married longer than we were single. We've been married 54 years. And so we've shared more together than we did
Phyllis,
apart.
you're gonna have to hold that up really close.
Oh, I do this. We have 2 children. Emily lives in Independence. And Sean, 3 or 4 years ago now, moved to Texas. And I still say, why in the world? You can come back anytime you want to, but we'll see whether that happens or not. It was employment that took him down there. Let's see, where's my next page on my notes? Oh, and numerous pets along the way. Lots of dogs. When we were in Nebraska, we had dogs. When we came to Iowa, we changed to cats. Gary grew up as a dog person. I grew up as a cat person, and so we have a loving companion. I want to start my history with before I was born. That's a much more interesting story than what I have to share. My father was born in on a ranch. I call it a ranch. They said it was a farm, but to me it was a big area in Bozeman, Montana. My mother was born in a sod cabin on the plains of North Dakota. That to me sounded really exciting. I think I never really explored things with them, but you know, a child hears that and they say, oh boy, wouldn't that have been fun? They both grew up in either northern Montana or Saskatchewan. My mother's father was a, I don't want to call him a land speculator, but he was a person who, when there was free land advertised, he would go and find it. They were from Minnesota in the Cutlerite community in Clitheroe. And so he would, that's how they got to North Dakota, and that's how they got to Saskatchewan. In fact, they ended up in Prince Albert, which is way up the province. And so that to me always was exciting, and I see these pictures of and wagons and cutting timber and building their own house, which my mom's house, one of them was a 2-story house that when they had snow, they had to go out the upper window to get outside. It was that deep. So to me, that's just really exciting.
Maybe when you're this tall.
As things turned out, my father came to Graceland in the academy in 1929. The academy was a group of students who did not have a long formal education. And I think he went to the 8th grade if he went that far. And so he was able to make that connection. My mother, living in, by that time her father died when she was 12, and they moved from Prince Albert to around Spokane, Washington. So they're all Northwest people. Before my father came here, he was in World War I and went to France. And that's another story. We have letters. My dad, you heard Stu talk about my father last week. A very interesting man. I wish I had spent more time with him. And I caution any young people, I don't see any young people here, talk to your parents. Don't wait until they're almost gone before you decide. Maybe you had an interesting life and you could learn something from it. So when Dad came to Graceland, he was, I would call it in training to be a church appointee. And his connection, his mother, my grandmother, whom I never knew, was baptized in Montana by Joseph Luff. When my father was born, he was named after Joseph Luff. Joseph Luff Sandage. So my connection with the reorganization goes a long way back. Now, with that kind of a historical preface, where do I come in? My parents were married in 1936. The church had said, we can continue to support one person, we cannot support a family. And so when they were married in 36 and Dad left the appointment, he had been in Oregon, Idaho, Washington, Idaho, Saskatchewan. Those were his territories. And so they lived in Spokane for a while. But I found out, interestingly to me, when I was teaching a freshman course, we had a book that we alternated through the semesters. And this one was called The Year the Emperor Was Divine. I was not going to mention this because of the implications of our country's history. But my dad put water on the trains that were going from the West Coast to the internment camps. I did not find that out until I taught the book, because I had to do some research, and I said, my father did that? Anyway, that's a whole nother story. So my background is varied, and I've appreciated all of that because the history that we come from often colors what we do, what we say, what we see as our purpose. I'm not a historian, but I love to read about it. I graduated from Graceland in 1965 with Lori. Anybody else? The rest of them are not here. No, Stu's not here. He's at a volleyball tournament. We make connections with those who have crossed our path early on. I met Lori and Bob Marshall, Forrest at Reunion. Also met Hat Dennis there, and Bonnie was part of that. I think so. I think so. Interesting how our connections, our paths have crossed. And then she ended up living across the hall from me at the dorm at Patronus. So
I always felt like we were sisters.
yeah. Where am I going? I have many directions that I can go. Finished Graceland in 1965, and we were talking about salaries. My first teaching position as a physical educator, and that's what I wanted to be. I had an interview at Centerville for $4,900. I had an interview in Omaha for $5,100. You can imagine which one won. So I went to Omaha, went to the big city, was in a brand new school which was not even completed on the northwest corner of Omaha. It was a combined junior senior high school. The one advantage to that school, and I look back and I think these are not coincidences as I look through some of the things that have happened in my life. That school had a swimming pool, a brand new school with a swimming pool. If I have a physical skill, it's swimming. And I've been an instructor for the Red Cross for lots of years, both swimming, canoeing, all of that kind of activity. So I was right at home thinking, I have this pool, I get to teach swimming, instead of the 6 classes that I have. The last hour of the day I had 90 students, a half a gym, and that pool. However, I didn't get to have the pool because there was another instructor just for the pool. So my last hour, the second day I was in class, I said, are there any of you students who would like to help me by switching to the first hour, which was my planning period? And I had 32 students who volunteered to do that. It was my very best class because I got to do the whole thing. I got to have the pool. So I was able to, had I been at another school, that would not have been an option. Johanna, whom you might remember, Joe was the person who hired me. He was part of the administration for the Omaha district. And I finished that first year, and I tell students, I'd come back and talk to them. I said, I learned more that first year than I learned in the 4 years and all those years of learning experience before that. I learned more that first year. And so take it as an opportunity to learn. So when Joe offered me a second-year contract, I took it, and I looked at it, and I handed it back to him, and I said, Joe, I was trained to teach. I was not trained to have students running around half a gym. If they were going to keep active, I had a supervisor that told me they should be moving all the time. I said, well, then all we're going to be doing is running around the gym. And I said, that's not what I'm here for. So thank you for the opportunity, and here's your contract, and signed. So let's see, what did I do next? Oh, yes. Again, those of you who were here last time heard about Stu McDowell and the hours that we spent together in a variety of capacities. Stu had gone on Stu and I grew up together from the time, I think, 7th grade, maybe 7th or 8th grade, when they moved to Independence. They moved to my neighborhood. And so we'd gone through high school together. We came through Graceland together. I taught. That was my year of education, of graduate education. Stu went to Indiana. During the spring, when I had really decided, teaching is just not for me, not at that level, I needed to go back to school. And so I contacted Stu and I asked him, what's it like in Indiana? I'd not been to a big university. And so he told me some things about it. I said, well, I'm going to make an application and we'll just see whether it works or not. And I was given a graduate assistantship. And at that point, I was in physical education. But halfway through, I said, if I'm really honest with myself, this is not what I want to teach. So I switched into health, same school, different group of professors, but connected. And so my doctorate, after 3 years, was in health and safety education. I don't believe that was an accident. Things have worked out very well. I was looking at our big kitchen window this morning and I thought, I am really blessed. I was born to a good family. I tell myself my mom and dad were goodly people. Like Nephi says, I was born of goodly parents. I don't think that was my choice, but it has come to fruition, I think. So I finished in Indiana. I took the easy route. I love to learn, and I was very comfortable there with the professors and the content and the activities. So I stayed. I finished my master's in 1 year, and I thought, I'm not ready to go back out into the real world. So I talked to my major professor, and I said, I think I'd like to go on a little bit farther. And he said, okay, let's work on it. So I did. I graduated with my HSD, and Stu has an RED. Indiana at that time gave specific degrees in health, physical education, recreation. So HSD, a PED, and a RED. So I graduated and I took a job at the University of Kentucky. Before I had my diploma in hand, but I went back to Indiana, I got my degree diploma in 1970. And then wherever Gary and I have gone since then, to Iowa, to Nebraska, to Kentucky first, sorry. Kentucky, Iowa, Nebraska, and back to Iowa. I grew up in Independence, Missouri. And so again, those of you that listened to Stu last week know about our history in growing up with Zion's League, and Stu was part of the state cabinet. He mentioned I had that position the year before him. So we were heavily involved in youth activities. My combination of health and physical education also embodied a love of nature. And so in the recreation area, I was in outdoor education. And as an instructor at Graceland for all these years, I've taught in every area that I would have been formally educated in, which, that doesn't usually happen. You often get pulled into other things that may be related, but I'm finishing now. I actually retired in 2010, but I've taught every year since then. One thing or another, whether it was a class that needed to be covered, whether student teachers, I'm still working with student teachers. I have one in the spring. And I told Steve Anders yesterday, I said, that's really the end. So, how many times have I heard that?
We'll believe it when we see it.
I guess my reason for staying here so long is that we all have at least one or two or three purposes for being here. And I have tried to take advantage of the purposes that I see, that opportunities have been provided for me to do whatever I can do. Why have I stayed associated with the church? You've heard a little bit about my history. There are some experiences along the way that have impacted my decisions. The first one that I want to share is kind of different. I learned to swim at Lake Donovan, which is the Center Stake campground. I haven't been there for many years, but that's where I learned to swim. That's where I got my training in a variety of water-related activities. I was a lifeguard at an Oriole camp. And on the way down, I told Gary, I said, I'm so grateful that my growing up years were based on that kind of experience that blended my religious training with the practical world that we live in. And I wanted others to experience a similar, have the opportunity to experience a similar event. Anyway, I was a senior in high school. I had just gotten my senior class ring. For me, in those days. This would have been 1961. $21 was a lot of money. And my folks had said, we'll go halves with you. So you come up with half of that $21 and they do the rest of it. So I was able to do that by saving whatever. Maybe I was given money to the grocery store and I could keep the change, that kind of thing. Because I was not employed. That was not a normal thing. And as I was lifeguarding, with that ring on my finger, it slipped off. How many of you have ever been in Lake Donovan? Down where the diving board was. So that's where the ring went off. A friend who was also a lifeguard did some diving with me. And it wasn't all that deep. It was probably 10 feet, maybe a little bit more. And as we went down, I went down again and again and again and again, and I had nothing. And Steve did the same. We'd kind of alternate. He'd do part, and he'd do some, and then I'd do some. And on the last dive that I took, there was that ring in a golden haze. Now, whether the ray of the light from the sun just hit it right, there was that ring. And I reached down and I picked it up.
Incredible.
There have been other events that have kept me as close as I can be to the God who placed me here. And that's my story.
Thanks to both of you for sharing. We have time for one or two questions.
That's a comment maybe Phyllis wants to add, but one of the things that she did at Graceland for years and years, she served as the faculty athletic rep for the athletic department. Phyllis can correct me, it's kind of one of those really important jobs that is thankless, because you're dealing a lot with just eligibility of all of the student athletes, certifying eligibility standards have been met, dealing with issues with student athletes as it relates to their academic pursuits. And sometimes there's some hard things that have to be worked out. When I went to work for Drake, and I worked with the dean of the College of Pharmacy, she was in the same role at Drake, and when she found out that I worked at Graceland, she said, "Does this mean you know Phyllis O'Daniels?" And I said, "Boy, do I." And she was held in such high regard by the Drake FAR to the point where the lady at Drake knew that Phyllis was named not FAR of the year for the conference, she was FAR for the entire country.
Wow.
And so I want to make sure that you all know that she did incredible work in that role.
She probably would not have mentioned that. She did not mention that.
Can I make one comment? It's a small detail, but important. Phyllis and Gary, of course, lives in Creston, and a round trip to Creston is almost 120 miles. She drove 120 miles for how many, 30 years?
36.
I hear about that very
120
often,
miles a day.
and the number of vehicles that she's gone through. Fortunately, only had one car accident that
That's amazing.
totaled the car. But, anyway,
That's amazing.
But neither one of them have said much about the service that they did at the congregation.
Yeah.
And we all had to work to help them out because they were very busy with the things they were doing. But Phyllis was a pastor for 6 years, I think it was, and she and I worked very closely together, and we did an excellent job at getting, because both of us came back in 1986 when things had really depleted in the Creston congregation, and we did our best to do some revitalization. I think the congregation benefited from it, and we had a lot of good times during their time. But it was, they gave when the rest of us couldn't do some things, and that's been highly appreciated. But it's hard to recognize when we've all gotten older and things got harder, and Gary he got the tough end of things I mean, door still isn't closed, but because we haven't sold, but he's been mowing the yard on foot ever since Bill left, I think, but how many people can do that at our age?
Countless hours of service. Thank you. Thank you for mentioning that, Nancy. And we haven't even talked about all the things that they have done. Each of you could have filled an hour easily, might I add. They objected to that, but one of the things I know, my sister lives over in Nauvoo, and one of the things she really appreciates is these two coming over to Reunion for years and years now, and giving service there as well, and being Holy Boy champions. Yeah.
I even have a shirt to prove it.
Oh, she has a shirt to prove it. I believe that. If you haven't played Holy Boy, don't start with these two. They'll be good teachers, but don't go into competition with them. Thank you so much for your service, both to the church, to Graceland, and to each one of us. We've all benefited from knowing you. Please fill out your cards. I've made an envelope for